Hey guys, just wanted to tell you that you're dope, and also that I opened a new merch store. I'm gonna link it below. I honestly just wanted to make something I'd wear, not too much promo or profit, so check it out and get something if you think it's dope. Share it with your friends and family and all that jazz. But yeah, check it out. I hope you find something you like. Dude, I love the creator vibe. Like, no matter your art, whether it's music, drawing, painting, even YouTube videos, you're still a creator, you know what I mean? So like, dude, I'm definitely grabbing these socks. I don't know why they're so tough to me. Anyway, go check that out, and as always, I appreciate the love and support, and I hope you enjoy this video. So this happened a few years ago when I was 19. I'm currently 23 and can still remember this happening vividly. I've only told my mom and my old therapist about this because it feels so outrageous and exaggerated that I feel too awkward to ever bring it up. But after reading other people's stories here, maybe it's not actually that far-fetched, and I wanted to share this with people who might hear me out. It was around 1 or 2 in the morning. Everyone else in the house was asleep except for me. I was sitting up in my bed on my laptop watching YouTube. I eventually decided it was late enough that I should try to get some sleep despite not being tired. So I closed my laptop and turned off the lights, making my bedroom completely pitch black. And then I laid down and got comfortable. I should note that at this time, my bed was positioned directly under my light switch, so all I needed to do to turn the lights on and off was to extend my arm up without actually getting out of bed. About roughly 10 minutes had passed, certainly not long enough for me to have been asleep or dozing off, considering the fact I wasn't tired, and I distinctly remember laying there wide awake. I say this because I know of sleep paralysis and other phenomena, but I don't believe my experience fits into any of those categories. As I was laying there, I suddenly felt the urge to open my eyes, and when I did, I saw a man standing over me. He had a huge smile, orange hair with slight curls, and was wearing aviator-style sunglasses, or at least that's what I thought they looked like. He looked to be in his late 20s or early 30s. He looked human, but as I recall from memory, his skin was slightly transparent. Like, he didn't look solid like a real person. He had this translucency. I immediately panicked, and this triggered my fight or flight response as I reached up and punched my fist through his face, which made the man almost seemingly dissipate around my hands into nothingness. I then reached up and turned the light on to an empty bedroom. Nothing had moved, and my bedroom door was still shut. All of this happened within the span of a few seconds. I don't remember how long it took for me to calm down or to get to sleep, but I did eventually, and told my mom the next morning what happened. She ended up buying sage the next day and saging the entire house. I've never had another experience like this again. I've never seen him again, and still have no idea why this happened. It took a long time for me to be able to sleep with the lights off, and I still sleep with the nightlight on to this day, because I have this terrible feeling that I'm always being watched in the dark now. This isn't something I talk about often. I was born and raised in Arizona, so I've had my fair share of encounters over the years. My mother has always told me that we're more sensitive than others. She grew up being told she was an indigo child, meaning I would be a crystal child, although the timeline for that doesn't exactly match up, considering I was born in the late 90s, and crystal children are believed to be born as early as 2001 or something, but I digress. Growing up, my half-sister would get to go to her grandmother's house up in Scottsdale every other weekend, on the pretense that it wasn't fair that I got to go to my dad's every other weekend and do fun things, which nothing fun was even happening, but whatever. This was back when there was a shit ton of empty desert between Phoenix and Scottsdale, and the lack of streetlights made it so if you look out the window without a moon, you're not really going to be able to see anything, other than maybe the shape of a cactus. My stepdad has worked nights my whole life, so when it was time to pick my sister up from her grandmother's house, it was just my mom and I in the car. It was pretty late at night, not a lot of traffic, and I assume the moon was either full or almost full that night. I don't remember most of the drive, but I do remember looking out the window at some point and seeing someone tall running with our car a few feet away. I didn't feel scared, and without looking away from them, I said, "I think a tall person is following us." Whenever I bring it up to my mom, she mentions that, 1, she also saw whatever it was and chose to ignore it because she's heard of skinwalkers her whole life and knows what they bring. And 2, it apparently followed us up until the streetlights started to appear again. I remember making eye contact with them because I was transfixed by what I was seeing. But nothing bad ever happened to either of us because of it, and I've never seen another skinwalker since then. I don't know if that means anything, if I'm marked or we're connected, but it's something interesting that I think about from time to time. I was maybe 8 or 9 years old. Me and my little sister, 2 years younger, shared a room, and we had a bunk bed. Me being the oldest, I had the top bunk. One night I woke up. It was dark, but the bed faced the window, so I could see the street lamps outside, giving the room some light. And I saw, sitting by my feet, staring at me, some black figure, almost childlike in appearance, but with glowing eyes. They were glowing black. It looked like it was made out of darkness. I don't know how to describe it. I was so confused and scared. Just a feeling of ice running through my spine. It tilted its head and then smiled at me. And suddenly, my sister starts to scream her lungs out. With that thing sitting by the stairs in the bunk bed, I just jumped down from the top bunk. Fortunate for me, we had a lot of stuffed toys on the floor I landed on. I grabbed my sister and we just bolted out of the room. Our parents just thought it was a nightmare, of course. I had trouble sleeping for weeks after that. I asked my sister about it like 10 years afterwards. Her response was that she had a nightmare where I got hurt by the Starless, and after that I started to hurt others. And she remembered it because I woke her up by picking her up and running out of the room. She was, of course, confused why I would do that, when normally when she had a nightmare, I would just lay down in the same bed as her, and we'd curl up together until she fell asleep again. She has no memory of her screaming, but I remember it as she was already sitting up in her bed when I landed on the floor. What the fuck was that thing? Do you guys have any theories? This story is something that happened to my grandma and grandpa when they were a young couple. It was in North Florida in the 1930s. They had gone out, and my grandma's brother and his wife were with them. It was late, and they were going down a long road through the woods. Up ahead, they started to see a green glowing light in the distance, kind of off to the side of the road. As they got closer, they realized it was something floating just above the ground, over the ditch that ran alongside of the road, and it was moving toward them. They stopped the car and waited for it to get closer so they could see what it was. As it got near them, they realized it was a man in a long coat of some sort, and he had on a fedora hat. He was glowing green and was floating above the ditch. He was in the air high enough that they didn't mistake missing his feet. They watched him float by, and as soon as he got past their car, he started moving faster, and then eventually disappeared. They all four saw it, and my grandma always wondered what it could have been. My first guess would be an extraterrestrial, if they do exist. So I just got back from taking my dog out with my mom. While we were out, we heard this piercing, inhuman sounding shriek in the distance that didn't sound anything like a fox or a bobcat or any kind of animal. I'm pretty familiar with animal calls, and I didn't recognize it as anything I've ever heard before. I'm nearly certain it wasn't a person, as there was no one in the area and it's really late. My mom described it as sounding like a human mimicking a cat scream, and my dog paused and then started growling in the direction as soon as he heard it. It was pretty freaky for sure, and left me feeling unsettled. We live in the Ozarks, if that means anything. And that's not the first time we've heard strange sounds over there. Usually we chalk it up to animals, but I always wonder if that's really what it is. My grief has taken a strange turn, so excuse my phrasing. It just still doesn't feel real. My father had throat and lung cancer, and we lived together. I cared for him when he would let me, but he was mostly fine. A strong-willed, stoic gentleman. He had cancer for 3 years, and was originally given merely weeks to live. Therapy was working at the start, but after years of trials, feeding tubes, and supplement drinks, my father was cadaverous, very underweight, and unable to walk without being out of breath, coughing up all sorts, and sleeping constantly like a newborn. At the end, it was no life at all, and I will be haunted by what I witnessed during our last year together. 2020 is the worst year for many. I came home from work, and before I put my keys in the front door, I felt something. A lack of life. All the lights were off, and I'd had such a wonderful day at work, full of laughter, but it felt like a fog. So, maybe I knew, or rather, my body knew, my father was gone all day. He must have passed away just moments after I left for work. I saw him sleeping in the morning, and he was fine. When I got home, I knew. I could just tell my father was no longer there. I entered the house and opened the living room door, and found him there, silent and cold. He looked so peaceful, a look I hadn't seen him sport for months. My dad's fight was over, and when you live with somebody who is terminally ill, you find yourself in a terrible way. A way between, they are out of pain, and why didn't they fight hard enough to stay with me, despite years of this fight? After the police, the coroner, my siblings, and of course my father had all left, I was in the house packing a bag to go and stay with my mother for a few days. I went into my spare room to find some pajamas, and all of a sudden, a smell. It was a smell my dad had when I was about 4 or 5 years old. I'm 30 now. The smell of booze, faintly, like he had popped into the pub bar for a pint, cigarettes, and Old Spice, mixed with suede. The smell was everywhere. I shouted to my mother, and she smelt it too. We stood there, together, smelling him. It felt like he was saying goodbye to me, reminding me of our best years together, before his cancer riddled us with fear and pain. I don't believe in spirits or anything like that, but I knew he was there. One last time. It's been 3 weeks since he died. I'm back at our home that we shared together, and I miss him terribly. His smell, the suede jacket smell, has gone. He is gone. It felt like he waited until everyone left. He wanted to say goodbye to his wife and his youngest daughter. I know it's a small thing, but I smelled him. A childhood smell that I missed and hadn't smelled since the 90s. A few years ago, my dad and I were walking our dog. It was relatively cold weather, but we were rounding a corner when we noticed a very large and very high up, relative to the clouds, orange light in the sky. I distinctly remember the clouds being very high, so we immediately ruled out a helicopter. Not to mention, the light was really bright, given that it was moving above and between the clouds. More than that, it was moving rather quickly up, down, and to the sides at different intervals. We thought it was a drone, but again, the clouds are way too high for it to be a drone, and it was covering too much distance. We both tried rationalizing it as possibly being an illusion, and that the light was in front of the clouds, but it humorously disappeared by going into the clouds. We had watched it for about 8 minutes or so, and in that time, neither of us had the presence of mind to film it. That too was something that weirded me out, as I normally filmed everything that I found interesting. This was in Houston, Texas, and for the life of me, I still can't figure out what it was. Not the most interesting story, but I haven't found a subreddit like this before, where I could talk about it. I've always believed in aliens, despite never encountering any myself. Until one night in July. These strange occurrences happened about 2 or 3 years ago, in the southeast region of New Hampshire. I still cannot explain what I saw, and neither can my mother. My mother and I got off of work, and were driving down this back road. We were about 5 to 7 minutes away from our house. I'm driving. We're approaching a hill that leads up to a long narrow road through the woods. I see a bright light hovering about 20 feet above the house, perched on top of the hill. My mother notices it too. I turn off the radio and roll down the windows. There was no noise. I drive up the hill and notice 2 cars stopped off on the side, looking up at the sky. I pass them and take a glimpse through the trees. I see a large square-shaped metal object. There are circular lights shining from the bottom. My mom and I turned around in the first driveway we could find. It took maybe 30 seconds, maybe less. We went back and it was gone. I was freaked out, but excited to have a UFO story of my own. The excitement gradually wore off, the more frequently the sightings became. My friend and I were walking along the beach across from my family's restaurant. We saw a light hovering near the lighthouse. We assumed the light had stopped revolving since it wasn't moving. Suddenly, the light jolted forward and began flying around maniacally. It dove behind the houses along the beach and disappeared. At this point, I've had another person in my life experience separate events. I knew it wasn't just a figment of my mom and I's imagination. My mother and I saw it about once a week for the next month after that. The light would be hovering in the distance, completely silent, and would disappear once we were too close. We chose to ignore it. As long as the light kept its distance, we felt moderately safe. Then came the close encounter. My mom and I got off work around 8 and returned home with a trunk of groceries. Our condo was at the very end of a cul-de-sac, and at the other end, a tiny hill with a line of tall trees. As we're bringing the bags into the house, I notice a light off in the distance. The light starts getting closer and closer until it's above the tree line, which is about 100 feet, give or take, from where our car is, and it stops. My mom is frightened at this point. I tell her I'm done being afraid, and stand there waiting for the light to approach me. As I begin walking toward it, it zooms off to my left and disappears above the forest tree line. I was shaken. The light had stopped and seemed to be observing my mother and I until we took notice. Since that summer, we've never seen it again, except for one other time, but we chalked it up to a drone. We tried to explain it away. A helicopter, but there was no noise. Plane wouldn't be able to stop moving so randomly. Even a drone. Although, you still can't explain the uneasy silence, etc. We began to think it was trying to abduct us, or maybe it already had, and we had no memory of it. Has anyone else experienced a strange light in New Hampshire? I'm willing to accept any explanation at this point. So for context, This happened to my mom in the late 60s or early 70s, and it still freaks her out to this day. She was about 8 years old. She's 57 on Friday. My mom had this friend, and during the summer, they would get on their bikes, ride to the local cemetery, and have a picnic. Don't ask me why she went to the cemetery. It's weird, I know. On this particular day, they ate their lunch as usual, and when they were done, they got on their bikes and started riding home. It was a really clear sunny day. This is important. They cut through a short bush track, and as they got to the end, they both simultaneously felt the need to look up into the sky, which had suddenly become dark. The thing is, she doesn't remember what she saw. She said her and her friend both saw something so evil in the sky at the same time that they've blocked it out of their memory. She's tried to remember what it was, but it was a traumatic experience for her, so she doesn't like to think about it too much. I'm posting here to ask, has something similar happened to you? Any theories? It goes without saying that after this incident, she stopped having picnics at the cemetery. I have an office chair at the end of my bed. It's covered in books, which makes what I'm about to describe even scarier. I'm no stranger to oddly vivid dreams, but this felt like it was actually happening. I had woken up to a little girl, about 5 or 6, sitting on the chair. She was tickling my feet through the blanket and saying, "Play with me. Come on, wake up and play." She suddenly lunged, and I guess I woke up for real. My chair was spinning like someone had just jumped off of it. I should add, I live alone.